This is weird, our Thursday night crowd mixing with our Wednesday
I was
crowd.
going to tell somebody for prayer.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Um, Prayers for Don LaFavor. It doesn't seem like he's getting better. And concerning.
Okay, yeah, so Don LaFavor and Joe's brother-in-law's family. So, do you want to pray, Katie?
Her name is Lillian.
Lillian? For those two?
God, we thank you so much for the chance to come together today and study your word. We thank you for just its availability, that we can read it anytime and that we have the freedom to discuss it freely. Please give us just receptive and open hearts today as we try to understand your truth, and be with us as we listen to Jacob's understanding and help us to be open to it. God, I know we have a lot of needs in our church right now. Pray for Don Favor, and I pray for Joe's brother-in-law's mother, who's just passed away. I pray for their family, Lillian. I just pray that you would comfort them, and we thank you for her testimony. God, we trust you with every decision that you make, and we want to be content with whatever you decide. And we just want to honor you with our time here today. In Jesus' name, amen.
I heard something in our Sunday school class a couple of weeks ago where they said that nothing comes to us that hasn't been filtered through God's hands.
Yeah.
We call it Father Filtered.
Father filtered.
Right.
Well, last week I had a page typed up, and then I realized that we were not going to get to it, so I didn't include it in your notes, but I threw it in this week. It's page 7, so it's the first part of the new packet. But I thought we'd look over it real briefly before we move on. Can you read this to us? No, I might stop you.
We will be tracing certain themes, about 5, through this book to deepen our understanding of these very profound concepts. We began one of them today, the human condition, weak and evil.
So by today I meant last week. That's what I'm saying. So that last week, that was the big point. Human beings, Israel in particular, and all of humanity is evil.
The book of Isaiah is really about our human wickedness and God's holiness, and his judgment, and his plan to reconcile us to himself, and his plan for us and him together forever.
So, I know that's a lot of ands, but that's essentially what the book's about. So it starts out with our wickedness. Now, today, we're going to move into God's holiness, and then his judgment, and then his plan to reconcile us, and his plan to be with us forever.
What do you say his name?
Montyer?
In the words of J. Montyer, author of the world's best Isaiah commentary, the whole book of Isaiah is an explication of this basic situation, the awesome threat which holiness constitutes to an unworthy, careless, rejecting, and unresponsive people, chapters 1 through 37, the length to which the Holy One will go to deal with sin, reclaim the sinner, and create a righteous people for himself, chapters 40 to 55, and the eternal state of holiness which he will prepare for them, and wherein they will enjoy him forever. Chapters 56 through 66.
So those are the 3 parts. Holiness poses a threat to people like us, and that is what we're going to look at today. Chapter 6. So I thought, it's only 13 verses, which is nice. So I thought we'd start, as I printed it out in your notes here, we start just by reading it. My wife is a gifted reader. I'm just going to have her read. We read together as a family, and like a chapter of a book to the kids. And I usually start reading, and I read about a page, and then I'm like,
kids like, can Mom read?
like, yeah, she's a much better reader out louder than me. So go ahead.
Can you just read the whole thing?
Yeah.
In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, for I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and whom will go for us? And I said, Here am I, send me. He said, Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, and understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Then I said, For how long, Lord? And he answered, Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away and the land is utterly forsaken. And though a tenth remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as the terebinth and oak leave stumps when they are cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land.
So if you were going to divide this chapter into 3 basic parts, where would you put those divisions? And don't just cheat and use the ones in your Bible, because Zondervan could have made a mistake. But I want you to...
Sure, we know better than Zondervan.
Well, I want you to think for yourself and think, where would it be and why would it be there?
Would 1 through 4 be the first one?
Yes. Yep, 1 through 4 is the vision. What was that?
5 through 10 and 11 on is kind of like a...
Yeah, I do think that there is a division between 10 and 11, but I think the 9 through 10 and 11 through 13, it's a conversation, sort of, between God and Isaiah. So I think that's the division, but that would be a subdivision. I think there's a larger division.
Well, the first part, like we talked about, is when he appears and he sees the vision. And then the second part is what our commands are telling him what he's to do. And I'm trying to figure out where that stops, and I haven't gotten that far.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a section in the middle. There's the what he saw, and then there's the commands of what to do, but there's a section in the middle that's about something else. A small section, but it's definitely different from the other things.
Like either between 7 and 8 or 8 and 9.
Yes. Yeah, so 5 through 7 are about Isaiah's response to his vision and the problem that seeing God, the Holy One, the problem that causes for Isaiah. And that has to be dealt with. Then after that's dealt with, then you can have 8 where God has a mission. So he has a vision, and then what that vision means for him personally, and then he's sent on a mission
So
in
the
verse 8.
vision would be 1 through 4. The response would be 5 through 7.
And then 8 through the end would be the mission. And Michael, you were right that up through 10 is what he's supposed to do and say, and then 11 on is a new section about how long that's going to last.
And even 13 is a kind of category of its own, because that's Israel,
Yes.
the tree dying, and his tongue being
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yes.
Future.
Yeah, it is part of his mission and how long it'll last, but it does plant a little seed for hope. So, okay, let's turn the page and we'll go through it bit by bit. I sort of broken it up. The first line says, in the year that King Uzziah died. So that year, now that's not after the death. A lot of times people think, okay, so the king died and now Isaiah sees this vision. But it's not, because back in chapter 1, verse 1, it said that his ministry started during the reign of Uzziah. So this is that last year of his life when this vision happens. So what's the situation then? Anyone remember the situation that year? The people, the leaders, and the culture?
They were rebellious, self-centered.
Yeah,
Worshipping idols.
worshiping idols, rebellious to God.
Sacrifices weren't pleasing to the Lord. because they weren't-
Right. Yeah, they were still doing some of the sacrifices in the temple to the true God, but it was an empty ritual, and so God was not pleased with it. So yeah, all in all, it was really bad. That was basically a summation of last week. But there was one bright spot in the culture, in the nation, was the king. The king was a good king, and arguably, what a person would say living there is say, "This is the best king we've had since Solomon." He feared God, he sought the Lord, and the Lord blessed everything he did, and he was conquering other nations. It helped that Egypt and Assyria, the superpowers, were weak. That those 50 years essentially of his reign, but he was conquering tons of other people. They were almost building up the old empire that we had under Solomon and David, and super wealthy. Everything was great, and you can see that verse there that I pasted in from Chronicles 26:5. Kate, you want to read that for us?
He sought God during the days of Zechariah, who instructed him in the fear of God. As long as he sought the Lord, God gave him success.
So everything he did met with success. So it was great. And the people were wicked, but their king was being blessed. So the economy was great. They had a godly king, and it was very prosperous and very powerful. But
Was he a good king all the time?
no,
That's
yeah, that's
But
Then,
you can see that I made a little visual thing, a little rectangle, and then there's the first majority of it. Everything's good, everything's great, prosperous, powerful, and then at the end of it, he becomes unfaithful and disrespectful. And by disrespectful, you might want to put in parentheses, no fear. And you notice in the first half it said the priest Zechariah taught him to fear God, and as long as he sought God, God gave him success. But then he becomes unfaithful, disrespectful, no fear, and then we'll see what happens next.
think about that rectangle, the timeline.
Yeah, the timeline for his reign. The majority of it was good, and then at the end it was bad. And the end.
Do you think that's a trend for a lot of the kings?
I think it's a trend.
I think of Saul, I think of, it springs to mind a lot of people that, a lot of.
Even David
stuff
sinned
like
near
that.
the end.
Dean, what were you going to say?
Well, power corrupts. And it's been a constant throughout human history. The more power you have, the more corrupt you get. Almost every king, being powerful, became corrupt. It's just a
David said,
continuing trend.
Right, which is why we limit our leader's time in
Which
office.
is why God didn't want them to have a king, but they demanded a king.
System.
Mm.
With the exception of maybe David.
Well, even he,
He had a big
He
sin.
kind, well, yeah, I know, but he kind of did it all the way along. It wasn't, like he went crazy at the end or something.
David isn't unusual as far as a typical corruption,
Right.
but it is true that as long as things were hard for David and he was running, he was close to God. And as soon as he got situated, he did a couple good things, and then bam. But yeah, I definitely think it's a human condition, and I think that's why God doesn't give us a lot of riches and power and whatever we want, because it's not good for us. That's why Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor," in Luke. Blessed are the poor in spirit in Matthew. Okay, let's look at this description of his downfall here in 2 Chronicles 26. Go ahead.
But after Uzziah became powerful, his pride led to his downfall. He was unfaithful to the Lord his God, and entered the temple of the Lord to burn incense on the altar of incense. Azariah the priest, with 80 other courageous priests of the Lord, followed him in. They confronted King Uzziah and said, "It is not right for you, Uzziah, to burn incense to the Lord. That was for the priests, for the humans who have been consecrated to burn incense. Leave the sanctuary, for you have been unfaithful, and you will not be honored by the Lord God." Uzziah, who had a censer in his hand, ready to burn incense, became angry. While he was raging at the priests in their presence before the incense altar in the Lord's temple, leprosy broke out on his forehead. When Azariah the chief priest and all other priests looked at him, they saw that he had leprosy on his forehead, so they hurried him out. Indeed, he himself was eager to leave, because the Lord had afflicted him. King Uzziah had leprosy until the day he died. He lived in a separate house, leprous and banned from the temple of the Lord. Jotham his son had charge of the palace and governed the people of the land.
So, the situation in which chapter 6, when Isaiah sees that vision, happens while Uzziah is still alive, but banished from his home, sort of a mini exile, and not really in charge of anything. He's the king, but he's dying and he is unclean. He's a leper. So in that little box I would put unclean or leprosy and banished. So that's not a good situation. Is there any way in which Uzziah, his life, is a good illustration for the whole nation of Israel, based on what we learned last week?
Well, because they wouldn't listen, they were banished from the land.
Yeah.
They was banished from the temple.
Yeah, well, yeah, they were going to be banished from the land. They weren't yet, but yes.
It started off good.
Yeah, Isaiah, yeah, they started off good. They were God's people, God's chosen people. And God led them into the promised land, but they continually, didn't listen to him. You remember in chapter 5, the poem of the vineyard? And in 5:4 he says, "What more could I have done for my vineyard?" And yet, what the vineyard, he did everything. He plowed it up, he did everything, took care of it, blessed it, everything. But all it yielded was bloodshed and cries of distress. So, Isaiah sees Uzziah's life as a good analogy for the whole nation. God blessed him. Everything he did was successful. I wish God would do that for me. And everything I tried, I remember running events as a pastor and nobody showed up. Sometimes they went really well, but sometimes nobody showed up. And I was like, okay, well, God, I guess you didn't want me to do this event. Okay. But everything he tried was successful. And yet he still turns away from God. And then when someone confronts him, he rages against them. So yeah, it is a good analogy for the whole nation. I think that's why he doesn't say in the 52nd year of Uzziah's reign, which is normally how a prophet would say what year it was. He doesn't say that. He says in the year of his death. That it's just it's a connection between how 1 through 5 ended with darkness. We didn't really talk about it ends with a dark term, but and now a time of death. And that will come into play as we go through the chapter. Okay, so it was really good. Well, it was really bad, but there was one bright spot, which was the king, but then he falls too. That is when Isaiah sees the Lord. Sometimes when what we have or what we hold on to is taken away, that is what allows us to see God anew. Sometimes what's needed in a time of trouble is a renewed vision of God. So that's what happens to Isaiah. Okay, so it says, in the year that he died, I saw the Lord. Now, let's compare that to Exodus 33:20, the second part of that verse. No one may see me and live. God says that to Moses. Or John 1:18, no one has ever seen God. So what's going on there? If no one has ever seen God, but Isaiah says, I saw the Lord.
Maybe he thought he saw the Lord. Maybe it was just all of a reflection. Not God. Kind of like Moses saw the burning bush.
Yeah, generally speaking, nobody sees God, but in the few exceptions, there's always some kind of secondary thing. They're not actually seeing God. They're seeing the burning bush, or they're seeing something. It says, when God shows himself, he shows an aspect. That's the word in the blank. An aspect of who he is. And typically there's certain attributes that he wants to reveal when he does that. So what is shown here in Isaiah 6?
Is it a seraphim? Is that what you're talking about?
Well, no. I mean, God is appearing in some way to Isaiah. What is he showing about himself? What aspect of who he is he? His holiness. Excellent.
He saw the seraphim.
Yeah. I think the fact that a seraph, it means burning one, something, so they were fiery.
It was interesting. I was looking at, may I share one thing with you?
Yeah.
It's, this is a David Jeremiah study book, and I thought this was interesting. It said, seraphim in 6:1-3, flying above God are astonishing beings called seraphim, meaning burning ones, who apparently dwell so close to the presence of God that they burn with holy brilliance. The seraphim sound continually praises God. That's in Revelation 4:8. They have 6 wings, 2 of which cover their faces in reverence, protecting them from the brilliance of God's glory. With 2 other wings, the seraphim cover their feet, showing their humility and their reverence, and waiting on God for his next direction. With the other 2 wings, the seraphim fly to do whatever God calls them to do. The seraphim cry, holy, holy, holy. Repetition is a Hebrew way of indicating emphasis. The Lord is absolutely holy, or set apart from all others as the exalted King of the world.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to get to all of that,
Okay.
but we just want to take it one
Right.
line at a time. But
I
yeah.
didn't mean to get ahead. I just
No,
wondered about
it's-
how was he seen? And I knew he
But
was
we're not
seen.
talking about the seraphim yet. Right now it's still, I saw the Lord. And what does he see about the Lord? He's got these amazing servants,
Holy.
these amazing beings that are just Yes. They're saying he's holy, but that doesn't necessarily mean that he sees the holiness. I mean, it may be.
He sees that he's high.
He sees that he's high
Okay.
and exalted, which would be the difference. What's the difference between high and exalted?
Exalted is higher than high.
Exalted is higher than high.
Exalted takes somebody to do the exalting.
Right, right. Like you,
We didn't hear that.
exalted takes someone to do the exalting.
Is that set apart?
Worshiping.
Yeah. So
He's like worshipped.
like, okay, Tom Brady won the Super Bowl last year, so we're like, well, he's this great quarterback. What if there's a better quarterback that just never plays publicly? Only alone in his backyard does he throw the football. He's the greatest. That guy's the greatest quarterback, but he's not exalted. He's got the greatness, but there's no exaltation because nobody sees it, nobody knows about it, nobody talks about it.
So they have to recognize.
Right. So God is high, and He's exalted. He's described as high. He's shown to be high. It's also the difference, which we're going to get to, in God's holiness and God's glory. One is what He is, and one is the showing of what He is. Okay, so yeah, He sees that God is high, He sees that God is exalted, praised. I mean, He's praised by these amazing beings. The more amazing your praiser is, the better, right? That's why people on the back of a book, this was an amazing book by the New York Times. They're not like, this was an amazing book by a third grader that we talked to. The more prestigious your praiser is, the more prestigious the praise, the more meaningful the praise. So He's high and exalted. He's seated on a throne. So what aspect of God, what aspect of Himself is God revealing to Isaiah? His highness? His
He's
exalted?
redemptive. He saves us.
Well, does the throne show that?
Is he a king because he was sitting on the throne?
Yeah, He's a king. So what does that show?
Authority.
Authority, power, yeah. The train of His robe fills the temple. Oh, by the way, sorry, before we get to that, the throne one, the king, the authority. Did you notice it says, I saw the Lord? You notice that only one of the four letters is capitalized? Typically, in the Bible, when you see the Lord talking about God, all four letters are capitalized. And the O-R-D are like a smaller form of capital letters. That's telling you this is His name, Yahweh, when you see all caps. But when you see just one cap, it's not His personal name, it's a title of like Lord or Master. And so that there, I mean, in the next verse, it's, verse 3, it's going to be the Lord in all caps. That's His name. But initially, it's Lord meaning Master, Sovereign One. So that's another authority term. Then it says, and the train of His robe filled the temple. Now this word could be train, it could be hem. It's essentially the same word. So, what do you think that shows about God?
All present.
All present. Well, yeah, He definitely is that.
I came from a fabric store right before I came here, so
I
it
did.
shows He's rich. Yeah, I mean, that's not cheap to have that much fabric. That's all one piece, you know.
What would that look like? If Isaiah saw God, high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the hem of His robe, or the train of His robe, fills the temple. Now this, of course, was before Solomon's temple was destroyed. So this was the Temple of Solomon. What would that look like? Can you visualize that? Yeah, why is it hard to visualize?
No one on earth has a world like that.
It's all
Except maybe a
encompassing.
queen or someone exotic, a woman with a big train for her wedding that covers up the church. Plus of the time in the street.
Yeah, what if it filled the whole church? What would that look like? This woman in her wedding dress and the hem of the train.
She owns the church.
What?
She owns the church.
She owns the church.
There would be room for her to move around.
It would be hard to see her if her dress filled the whole church.
Maybe that role was a covering for that. Or they wouldn't be killed or something.
Let's flip to the back of the book, meaning the book of Isaiah, chapter 66. Let's just cross-reference it with 66:1. So the last chapter in Isaiah. Can someone read Isaiah 66:1 for us? Oh, Kate, you want to read that?
Thus saith the Lord, the heaven is my throne, and the earth is my footstool. Where is the house that you built upon me, and where is the place of my rest?
Okay, so again, we've got a reference to a throne, we've got a reference to the temple, the house of God.
The earth, the footstool.
Yeah, heaven is his throne. The ancient conception of the world, I mean, when we think of the world, I think of like pictures I've seen taken of the world from outer space. But you can imagine that no one in the ancient times would visualize the world as like a ball in space, right? This is how they thought of it, because this is what it looks like when you go outside. They thought of, oh, that doesn't, right. They thought of, there's the big dome. This is bad too. Yes, I do. There's a big dome, and there is some land, and then this will be my water. There is water, and this is all water, the deep, because if you dig down far enough, you always hit water. But if you throw dirt into water or a rock, it sinks. So there must be some kind of pillars holding it up. So that's why you get Bible passages saying God established the pillars of the earth and things like that. Okay, so this is what they see, and then up here above this dome, he can see everything, is the throne of God. Here's the throne. And of course the stars would be in this clear dome thing, and God can look down and see everything. And you get references in the Bible, oh, that you would rend the heavens and come down, because there's something between you and us. There's the sky thing, the heavens. This would be, where the birds fly in here, but this is the heavens. Okay. So, here is, say, the temple, right? And the big door. And Isaiah says, I saw the Lord on his throne, and the hem of his garment filled the temple. So it's possible that it doesn't say God was in the temple. It says the hem of his garment filled the temple. Where's God? God's high and exalted. So what exactly does that mean? It's not totally clear, but somehow he sees him. Now maybe the throne has descended upon the temple, above it, something. Maybe Isaiah only sees the feet of the throne and the feet of God and just the hem.
Isn't it referring to basically God as omnipotent and all-powerful and knows all? Wouldn't that be a way of saying that?
it's definitely emphasizing God's grandeur. So whether he's somehow in there and the robe is filling the temple and he can still see him, or whether the throne has descended upon the temple and only the robe has filled it up, but God's up here, God's face. Obviously God doesn't literally have a face, but it talks about, God having a face. The point is, the vision of God he has is not just like, oh, I got to see God, right? It was this shocking, terrifying thing that he saw. Amazing, awesome, in the true sense of the word awesome. Like awe and fear and terror and dread. Imagine, we have nothing like this in our culture because, if we talk about the most powerful person in our country, like the president, well, mainly what people talk about him is to make fun of him and stuff like that. But we just have nothing. This is the worst example possible, but I remember as a first grader getting called to the principal's office, and nobody else, in my class had ever had that happen. And I was really scared. I'd only seen him up on the stage, and he didn't know who I was. He just saw a sea of little kids. And I was in first grade, and suddenly I'm in his office. That's the tiniest millionth of a percent for what's going on here with Isaiah. I was just scared because he's this powerful person. He runs the whole school. I didn't know what he was. But that's what's going on here.
It wasn't Jesus that Isaiah was seeing, was it?
It wasn't Jesus because Jesus... Well, let's put it this way. The body that Jesus had was a literal physical body that would, bleed and then get scabs, and it was a real body made of matter. So that body doesn't exist yet. Just like my grandkids, their bodies, assuming I have grandkids, their bodies don't exist yet. But they will, probably. I had 4, I better get at least 1 grandkid out of the deal. But you see what I'm saying though, right? Jesus' body does not exist at this time in history.
I've heard people say, well, when Daniel, or when Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were in the fiery furnace, that was Jesus came down and he was the 4th person.
Well, God the Son, the second person of the Trinity, he exists, but he doesn't have a body at this point. The reason people say that is because Nebuchadnezzar says it was like the Son of God. But the concept that a pagan king has of a child of deity is pretty weak at best. His theology is not real great. So the point is, it was some kind of divine being I saw in there. Right? So to say that it's Jesus, it could be, Jesus and the Father are one, so it could be God the Son that he's seeing, or God the Father, or both, but it's not Jesus' body that we think of from the Gospels.
Right, not his body, because he saw him, he lived, so he saw Jesus. Well, that explains why he wouldn't just die. Jesus had a throne, train, that kind of makes sense. When Isaiah was in heaven, he saw God.
This right here in chapter 6? Well, I don't think Isaiah is in heaven. He's seeing the temple, which is on earth, a physical temple that was built a couple hundred years previous. He sees God somehow, maybe in the temple, maybe above the temple. So...
what if Isaiah was in the temple, just there, doing his thing, worshiping God, and all of a sudden sees the throne high and lifted up, but the hymns in the temple?
Okay, yeah.
You're saying that's a possibility?
Yeah, a possibility. I would have positioned him just outside the doors because of what's going to come in a minute. But yeah, something like that. Maybe he's there at the temple and he sees the throne and just the hem is hanging down, or the train is hanging down into the temple itself. There's a lot of questions that we'd like to know that don't really get answered. Because Isaiah is making certain points. He's not trying to describe, here's exactly what it looked like, and by the way, if you're interested, the feet of the throne had those little claw feet. Like, that's not the purpose of what he's saying, so he doesn't include any details like that.
Whatever the
I'd like to know what the
case.
throne looks like. I'd like to know what the robe felt like. I mean, there's a lot of questions I'd like to
But
know.
it's an imposing scene.
Yeah,
regardless.
the big picture there is it's an imposing scene. And God, everything about it is God is majestic and amazing and powerful, like you were saying, Dean.
And we don't know where he was, if he was sleeping or anything, other than he just had a vision.
Yeah, it's true. It could have been a vision that was sent to his mind, or it could have been he actually, like, God was there all the time, but God just let him see him for a minute. There's a lot that we don't know. I'd like to know. Okay, so now we get to the seraphim, or seraphs, if you want to use an English plural.
The seraphim.
A seraph, one seraph,
This is one.
two seraphim, or two seraphs. M is the Hebrew plural ending, and S is the English plural ending. So there's never seraphims or cherubims. But that's not important. Okay, above him were the seraphim. Now, the word above is the same word. Do you remember when Abraham had divine visitors, and it said he ran and got them, prepared food for them, and they were under a tree, and he waited on them, or he stood there near them? That's the word. When they're under the tree eating the meal that Abraham prepared, he wasn't standing above them like he climbed up in the tree and stood there. Right? He wasn't standing on them. He was waiting on them. So that word, like a waiter waits on you, they're not on you though. They're serving you. Do you see the point?
Or you think about somebody kind of hovering over you while you're trying to work. They're not literally like floating. They're just nearby, right?
Right. So the language comes from a king who's seated and his servants are standing, and they're waiting on him, or in Hebrew they're waiting over him. They're his servants. So the point there is not to picture, okay, so he was down in the temple, God was there, and then way up there he saw these seraphs. That's not the point. The point is that they're the servants of God. Where they were spatially in this image is not exactly what's being communicated. By the way, these amazing beings, the fact that, I think maybe I already said this, the fact that they're serving God and their whole job is just to talk about how awesome he is, how holy he is, adds to his holiness. Okay, so each one had 6 wings. And I know you probably, if you're like me, you picture like a humanoid shape with wings, but it doesn't say that.
You know, they have faces and feet.
Yes. So anyway, all the angels in the New Testament do not have wings. They look like people. So these are some kind of spiritual beings. We would think of them as angelic, but the word angel is not used for these things. So I'm just trying to clarify some details there.
Would you say
Is there, oh, I'm
would
sorry.
you say seraphim stood for in Arabic? I mean,
Burning ones. Yeah.
What was that from?
Something fiery. Yeah.
Is there something symbolic about the 6 wings?
Well, the number 6, I can't say. I'm not big into meanings of numbers.
Okay.
but there is something symbolic about what they use their wings for, or something important. I don't know if symbolic is the right word, but with two wings they cover their faces. So not even this high order of heavenly being can look at God.
Really, they've never sinned.
Yeah. I mean,
And his definition too, he refers to that as humility. In the definition I read, he was saying they were humble, he was
I think what you read said about covering their feet showed their humility.
Was it that?
Yeah. But the point there is, though, these beings that have never sinned, that are, I would be tempted to worship one if I saw it. Hopefully I wouldn't. Probably he'd stop me if I tried to, because John tried to worship a heavenly being, and the angel's like, no, don't worship me. Jeez, I'm just a servant like you. But anyway, those things, they can't even see God's presence. They can't see his face. They're covering their face. Okay, with two they cover their feet. Yeah, it could be a sign of humility. It could be a symbol that we do whatever God tells us. We're not going to choose our own path. There's a lot of speculation about why they cover their feet. And with two they're flying. Okay, and they're calling to one another. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. There it uses his name, Jehovah or Yahweh. Almighty or of hosts, depending on your translation. So let's talk about the holiness. What does that mean?
Holiness, perfection, sinless.
Good, yeah. Perfection, sinless. What else?
Supposed to strike.
Divine.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, like if there were a word like goddish, godly has a whole lot of other baggage with it. I like the word sacred. Purity. Yeah. Once again, we have nothing sacred in our culture. Yeah. I guess the most sacred thing we have is a wedding dress in our culture. It's for something special, and you're like super.
Keep it nice.
Keep it really.
Like,
You wear it one time and you keep it nice, and
keep it in plastic for the rest of your life.
and the fact that you only wear it once is part of its specialness. Yeah. Okay. But there's so much more to it, but we don't really have time to do the whole thing. I did a class, one whole hour about the word holy, so we can't really spend too much time. But I will say this, Donna, this is something that was mentioned there, that it says it 3 times, and typically they would repeat for emphasis, or like in Hebrew, in the Bible, when it says pure gold, it's translated in English pure gold. In Hebrew, it's gold, gold. That's not just gold, that's gold, gold. So we translate that pure gold to help it make sense to an English reader. This is the only time in the whole Bible, in the whole Old Testament. And there's one time in the Old Testament, one time in the New Testament when it uses a 3-time repetition. So He's not just holy, He's holy, holy. And He's not just holy, holy, He's holy, holy, holy. It's almost like Isaiah invents a new form of syntax to emphasize just how holy God is.
I always get chills when we sing that. that church in Holy, Holy, Holy is the Lord God Almighty.
Yeah. Have you noticed that that whole song has kind of a Catholic feel to it? Anyone noticed that? See, the Catholic Church does a really good job of helping people feel that sense of awe with the way they build their places of worship, right? Their cathedrals. You go in, especially if you're, in like Europe, where they're like in Rome or in Israel, where they're building these huge ones, and you go in and and it's just so huge and ornate and austere, and there's just this feeling of like, oh, and everything's quiet. Yeah. And the point of doing that is not to show off how much money the Catholic Church has. The point of doing that is to help the worshiper come in and feel, wow, God is...
To make it feel small and plain.
Yeah. And you come in and you just naturally just talk quietly to him. You know what I mean?
And in that song, it uses so many words like perfect in love and power and purity and, all the descriptive words that it just kind of really makes you feel worshipful.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Baptists purposefully try to not make their churches like that because they want to make sure that they are not seen. Like, you don't want the pastor to give this impression of like, look how great I am, and I run this great facility, which is also true. So, and you can only communicate one of those two things with your building. You can't do both. So, and they're both valuable. So that's just why Baptists have built their buildings the way they do, and why Catholics have done theirs that way. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot more here, but we really need to skip down to verse 5. So Isaiah's response, "Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined." Or in the King James, "I am undone." What is Isaiah saying?
Sees himself for what he is.
Yeah.
I think last night you made your own translation, I'm toast.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, for I am undone, or I am ruined, I'm toast. I'm a dead man. I mean, if even those things can't look at God, and I saw him, woe to me. And why? Why does he consider himself?
He has unclean lips.
Yeah, I'm a man of unclean lips, and I dwell on the people of unclean lips. My eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. A commentator I read said, even the least sin, which is, right, a sin of your words, versus I'm not actually stabbing you, I'm just like, that guy's a jerk, right? That's like the least sin you can do, is a verbal sin. Even the least sin mixed with the least amount of contact, seeing God, right? Like, you go to a crowd and you see the president. Like, I know the president. Oh, really? Yeah, I saw him. Well, that's like the least amount of contact you can have with somebody. Talking on the phone would be better. And that's still, but face-to-face was even better. And living with them and getting to know them and all doing stuff together, that'd be even better. But the least amount of contact is seeing. So the least sin mixed with the least amount of contact with God is a deadly combination. That's part of the point here. Isaiah is I'm dead because I am a sinner. I dwell in the midst of a sinful people. Now, how come, Isaiah's culture is really bad. We talked about that last week. And Isaiah is probably not as bad as the rest of them. honestly, right? But why doesn't he say that? I am a sinner and everybody else is even more sinful than me. I'm a sinner, yes. I'm not as bad as my culture. He doesn't do that. He assumes guilt with his whole culture. But I've noticed that that's not what Christians do. Christians in our church, they're like, yeah, we're all sinners, but look at what is going on in the world today. Boy, that is just terrible. I don't do that. I don't even watch that stuff on TV, because I'm a lot better than that. Isn't that the attitude we have a lot? That's not a godly attitude. The godly attitude here is, I'm a sinner, and I come from a whole race of sinners. It actually adds to Isaiah's guilt. I don't know if he's saying that he should have distanced himself from the people he lives among or what. But okay. We have 2 minutes. So last week, the section we covered raised a question. Because buried in all those everybody's terrible stuff, there was a prophecy that Isaiah said that someday Zion, Jerusalem, is going to be a beacon to the nations. And all the other nations are going to come to learn about God. But we're all terrible. They're all terrible. Everyone in Jerusalem is terrible. It's all terrible. They're all going to be destroyed. It's all terrible. And so it raises a question, how are these people going to become the beacon if all that's waiting for them is judgment and destruction, and exile? Their city's going to be destroyed, and they're going to go to exile, and they're going to be gone and punished. How is those terrible people ever going to be that beacon? How's that prophecy in chapter 2, which we didn't cover last week, how's that going to be fulfilled? And this is the answer to it. One of the seraphim flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, "See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin is atoned for." Your guilt's gone, your sin is covered, paid for. And this is something new. Never in the law of Moses is fire ever used as purifying. It's connected to the law of Moses because it's a coal from the altar where sacrifices are made. And it's still hot, which means they just did one of those sacrifices. And we don't know what time of year this was. We don't know if it was the Passover sacrifice or what sacrifice it was. But it was a sacrifice, and the angel, he's burning, and he takes it with tongs, sits on his hand. I always find that image funny. But he touches it to Isaiah's mouth and says, that takes care of it for you. Now, probably that's special circumstances because God has a mission for Isaiah to prophesy, a message for him. But just like Uzziah was a picture for the whole nation and their doom, Isaiah now becomes a good picture for the whole nation and God's plan for purifying them. That was for him personally. No, that was for him personally. But Isaiah sees himself as essentially this. I can't do this for God. I can't see God. God says, I have a plan that you didn't know about, something new that Moses didn't write about, a way to purify you. And so Isaiah says, oh, so God can come up with a new plan for a way to make a sinner pure. I couldn't do it. All my righteousness is filthy rags. But God can come up with a way to make a sinner pure. He did that for me. He can do it for the whole nation. And then he's sent on his mission to the nation. His mission is, you're not going to listen. Your hearts are going to be hard. And then he says, well, how long do I have to preach that downer message? 10 years and then revival? 20 years and then revival? God says, until everything is destroyed. And Isaiah won't live to see any of it. He'll preach his whole life and no one will listen his whole life. And there is, like you said, Michael, there is a little seed of hope in the last verse. Like a tree, you cut it down, then you burn the stump. And if you've ever burned a stump, you know you burn it. And you're like, okay, that should be gone. That was a huge fire, but it's still there. And you burn it again. There's still this cut down, burnt stump, but it's still there. And from that is going to spring a shoot. It's going to be Jesus Christ. So God's plan, 700 years later, will come to fruition. So that is Isaiah's call. Any questions?
Is the hot burning coal symbolic of Christ? He said the sins are atoned for. Being only Jesus can atone for our sins.
Yes, it is, but in a very, very secondary or tertiary way. There's no direct symbolism. It's burning, and so Jesus, there's no direct correlation between the coal and Jesus, but the correlation is God came up with a new plan for a new way to purify someone. It's related to sacrifice because it comes from the altar. Just like the new plan is going to be related to the sacrificial system, Jesus becomes the true sacrifice lamb. So it's not a direct symbolism, but it is, yes, it is. So. Good question. Dean?
Is he setting the stage for the kings, the story of the kings? This takes place during the Book of Kings. In fact, if you read through Kings and Chronicles, which both of those books are essentially the same information, you'll see Isaiah's name. It'll mention him. And then it'll go on past his death, though. So if you were to make it chronological, you'd insert the book of Isaiah inside the Book of Kings.
Well, look how many times he's referred to in the New Testament.
Isaiah, other than Psalms, is the most quoted book. Yeah.
I find it interesting that if you think about pastors and just working for the Lord today, a lot of times we as Christians judge our work that we do or things that the Lord has told us to do by the fruits of that. And we're told to judge, by fruits, things of that nature as a church. But here's Isaiah, really his only connection to know that he's doing God's will is this vision and being asked to do that. And then being told that his whole life he's going to be preaching this message that no one's going to receive and no one's going to do anything about. I mean, what a bummer.
Am I doing it right?
Yeah.
You get where I'm coming from?
I totally do.
So sometimes maybe maybe we're all a part of a bigger scheme of things, and our lifestyle in the United States, we want I want to do something today. I want it done by tomorrow, and go on to the next thing, and all those kinds of things. I don't know what I'm saying, but it's kind
No,
of
I do.
where my head is thinking.
Instant gratification, I think.
Yeah, that's the gratification instead of looking at the bigger plan and going, hey, this is what God wants me to do. I'm going to do it no matter what.
Yeah, you obey and leave the results up to God, but that's hard though.
Yeah.
I have labored in a very unfruitful field before, and I said, God, I'm doing this for you, but it'd sure be nice to see some fruit of this.
It would be very discouraging.
It would be, and that's his ordination, essentially. The start of his ministry. Want to be my minister, and nobody's going to listen. In fact, the very fact that you're speaking the truth to them is what's going to harden their hearts. They're so corrupt that the truth itself guarantees that they won't listen.
But there's still a promise in the end.
There is, yes.
I mean, just,
That's the hope.
yeah.
Yes.
There's a certain analogy with Paul in his ministry. he knew he was gonna be killed because of his, of what he was doing. He knew that, and yet he persevered and kept on going.
Yeah. In fact,
What an analogy there.
it seems like Luke, when he wrote the book of Acts, which is where we get most of our information about Paul, very purposefully made Paul's life kind of analogous to Jesus' life. And I think the point of that is, if you truly follow Jesus Christ, your life will look like his. And there will be suffering.
You know, you hear more and more too, like as I was coming today, they were talking about, I believe it was Texas, you can correct me if you heard it too, but it was someplace where there were 3 churches vandalized last night by Christian haters. And they had taken red paint and painted, words and things all over. I also heard about in California where they were having a Bible study. The neighbors complained. I mean, there's many times you have bunko parties and things, and they complained. And they had to stop doing their Bible study. So they're being attacked.
We had a thing about 2 years ago in Pembroke, and we got the hall, grand hall, had speakers coming in, so we made flyers up, and in Pembroke they have little pigeonhole things like a free mailing system, and we were passing all the flyers out, and I got a call from the RSO office. They said, you need to come up here. Somebody had complained, a non-Christian had complained that we were having, this activity at the Grand Hall, and they said, we're gonna need to go remove all those flyers out. And, unfortunately, I was very slow in getting there. It might have been 3 or 4 o'clock by the time everybody got their mail, by the time I got there and got those flyers out, but, I mean, just even in that. And the ironic thing is they have church services at the Grand Hall every Sunday put on by Leesburg Baptist. So it's not it's an uncommon, thing to have.
Oh, in the villages, for a while, we put in little white crosses. And they complain about that, and you get penalized a fine for leaving a white cross in your
Right.
yard.
Yeah.
And that is ruling in the villages.
Yeah, I read that in Popular Village.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah,
You can have Mary in a tub.
that's right. You can have your little gnome out front, but.
They should have a cross.
Where are all the Catholic statues? Still on the street.
Yeah.
I'm gonna shut the movie, I'm gonna shut this
Yeah.
before we say something.